this particular side event, we're going to be talking about electric utility digital transformation journey. And I think that that's a subject matter. That's a subject matter that warrants greater attention. Given the fact that we want a sustainable future, we want alternative generations, the utilities as a whole have to sort of manage that type of generation portfolio. And to do that, we're talking about a digital solution strategy to gain greater optimization out of those existing assets. And the panel that we have assembled is just brings to the table a tremendous amount of skills. The first individual, his name is Michael Bates. He's the general manager of energy at Intel Corporation. You might have heard that company. And the second gentleman brings many, many years. His name is Philip Carey. He has his own consulting firm and spent over 20 years with Southern California Edison, truly addressing some of these grid-related challenges. So we have a really interesting conversation, but before I get going on that, I want to just give you guys kudos because I think the future is a digital solution. It's a human solution, but it's also an innovative technology digital solution that will be addressing many of these challenges going forward. And I think because right now is a great time for technology and being able to leverage technologies to solve many of the problems around the world, kudos to you. Companies like Cap Logistics, Water Design Build Council, Neom, others, they are all in on collaborating and innovating in their particular space. And I think that companies, you professionally, will definitely benefit from this particular journey that we're going to be talking about. So let's get on with the conversation. Once again, the two individuals, Michael Bates, Philip Carey, myself, Scott McKenzie, and we're going to be talking electric utility, digital transformation, the journey, because it is a journey. Welcome. And I appreciate you guys wanting to talk a little bit about the electric utility digital transformation journey. And it's a journey. Welcome, guys. Give us a little background on who you are, because they haven't gone out to your LinkedIn stat card right now.
My role at Intel is to look for opportunities to apply our technology and convene our ecosystem of partners to address big industry challenges in our energy vertical. So energy in our case includes oil and gas, power utilities, the new energy service companies that are getting into the renewable energy services, for example, the EV charging area as well as digital oil field, smart ag, and water. So we look across different areas of energy and where the impact of the grid is there.
Phil, thank you.
Yeah, so my background's a little different. I was formerly at Southern California Edison for 22 years in IT the entire time, but started out in IT operations, and then at one point found myself in a architecture group, and then transferred into a group called IT Smart Grid Engineering, where we were an IT group that was embedded with the OT group in transmission and distribution, the Advanced Technologies group. That's where I learned a whole lot about the business. And while I was there, developed this common substation platform. I retired at the end of 2019, and now I'm off on my own as a consultant. And I've done some work with Intel and with Dell Technologies. And here I am.
We're focusing in on utilities. And typically, utilities tend to be sort of legacy thinking. This is why we're here. This is and it hasn't really changed for a long time. Give us a little sort of that utility thinking, not today, but in the past, sort of that utility thought process.
Yeah, so the current utility networks were designed, we're using 100-year-old technology, essentially. It was designed to generate electricity and to deliver it to customers. And the utility's job was to get that electricity in one direction from the generator to the customer and to balance load with generation. And as long as load and generation stayed balanced, and electricity was flowing through the system, everybody was happy.
It's true. It is. It's such a simple explanation, but it's like when I come into a room and I flip that switch, me consumer or me manufacturer or me whatever, that power be better to be delivered at the right cycles, right voltage, all of the stuff. It has to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way utilities have been developed. It's just that's what it is, and rightly so. But what's changing, Mike?
Well, one thing is changing is, the model is changing. And, to Phil's point, the utilities of the past and still current were built around reliability, keep the lights on. So the talent they acquired, the training they gave, the policy and regulation to support that model has all been ingrained for, like you said, since really much the inception of electric delivery. One-way flow of power from centralized generation, coal plants, nuclear plants, then through step down to consumption at the far edge. That's been the model, and the technology has been in place to support that model of keep the lights on at all cost. And I think Phil might agree, and he's much more of into the technology side than I am, but it feels like a siloed stack of solutions have been built around this grid reliability model. And now the grid, the delivery model is really turning upside down. It's changing from that one-way flow from centralized generation to two-way flow from hundreds and thousands of millions of points of generation on the opposite side of the grid, on the other side of the substation. So it wasn't built to take on that two-way flow. Equipment maintenance costs go up because equipment wasn't designed for it. There's lost opportunity cost because you're not connecting these new loads in a way under the kind of common substation platform that Phil required. So it's a major shift of focus from the generation side down to the consumer side, consumer-owned asset side. And now you're asking a company that's been built to keep the lights on to now become a customer-focused company. Look, if the opportunity in the future is around services, you've got to remake and re-engineer a company to make that pivot. And it's hard for some companies to make that pivot, especially in the utility space.
Yeah, and an example of that, and it's not not the utility industry, but IBM used to be the biggest hardware manufacturer in the world. And today they're a software and services company. They hardly make any hardware. So This is where the utilities need to go. And they need to look at how their business model is changing and accommodate that.
If you don't mind, Scott, I was just going to add to what Phil said. I think the other thing I've heard, the other comparison I've heard, Phil, and I think all of us on the call are around to remember the telecommunications restructuring, where the companies like the Southwestern Bells of the world who built all that infrastructure to enable what we see today were not the companies that really profited from it. It was Facebook, Google, Amazon. They used all that infrastructure that was built and created services around it, and the infrastructure providers haven't even caught up since then. I think that's one of the inflection points we're at today, is who's going to own that piece going forward.
So in a sort of simplified, in my head, is that utilities were built in a way where I generate power, I transmit that power, I stick it into a distribution substation, and I just keep on bringing it down to the consumer level. Today, and that's fine. That's right. I see that flow. But today is like, okay, we have some that flow that go that way, right? But then on the other side of that transformer or that bus is also generation that's happening on that side. So so now we're saying it's got to flow the other way, and it's got to flow into this magical system, and it's supposed to just happen. It's like everything just sort of lines up, but that's not the case. That's not the case at all. What problems is this new sort of dynamic grid causing on my system, Phil?
So one of the large problems is load doesn't necessarily match the generation. specifically out on some of the feeder circuits. So to combat this, the utility really needs the capability to be able to reconfigure the feeder circuits to better match the load. Another issue is, in the past, if I had a fault on one of those distribution circuits, I could tell by measuring the power flow through the relay. And when it got out of specification, I knew there was something wrong. The system knew there was something wrong, and that relay would send a trip signal to the circuit breaker. Well, now that I have generation on both sides of that relay, how do I detect a fault?
That's a very good point.
Yeah, so that's where some of this digital controls come in, so that we can measure and know how to deal with two-way flow of energy now.
Mike, what other problems are utilities dealing with in this particular, whatever we call it?
So other problems that they face, and again, some of this is technology, although I would argue the technology exists to do the kind of things that Phil and I are talking about. There needs to be investment and alignment, mostly through policy and regulation that allows for the type of investments. And I think we're getting there. I think there's other market drivers. So you asked the question before, or you didn't ask it. You were saying that this was an evolution, and you and I talked about this before. I was at maybe it was a Distributech dinner or something, and someone asked the question. This was 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago. It's like everybody in the room that thinks that this is an evolution, raise your hand. And literally 3/4 or more of the room raised their hand. Oh, this is an evolution. And it was mostly utilities, the understanding that this was an evolving process. It was under their control, or kind of evolve it as they drive it. But I think what's changed now, and then the rest of 10% maybe said revolution. I think if you did the same poll today, it might be the opposite, because I think there's market drivers outside of the utilities control that it really is forcing the change. One is a focus around sustainability and impacts of climate change that cannot be ignored by the utility. So mandates by states, companies, again, particularly in areas where there's been energy resiliency issues, like in Texas around the storm, in California around the wildfires, where companies are looking for alternative sources to roll their own energy system. So as more and more of those, if that pain point keeps bringing more and more companies and customers to roll their own energy, that's more of a problem on the other side of the grid that Phil is talking about. So corporate sustainability driving a lot. And I also think we're going to start hearing more how financial markets are looking at carbon-based, so companies with high carbon footprint, carbon-based assets, which will move companies again away from that one-way flow of centralized power, which is dirtier in general, to more decentralized power on the edge. Again, exacerbating the problem. And then finally, EVs. One could argue we're at the inflection point now, but if you follow this industry at all, the companies that have declared the end of combustion engines, the policy the support from Europe and the U.S. around the administration. So I think those market drivers, and again, I sorry to go on so long here, but those market drivers are really pushing them in ways that are forcing them into this type of a platform that Phil's talking about, to be able to enable more services and become a player in this new opportunity.
So
right, and you know what? It's a little bit more than that, because it's the regulators as well.
Yeah,
if you look at California's renewable portfolio standard, going to 100% renewables, I think it's by 2050.
Yep.
And Washington State, where I am at now, just in the last week or so, passed a carbon tax resolution in the House.
What has to change?
Yeah, and you know what? The technology of this is the easy part, right? Michael mentioned some of that technology is already around. It's usable. New technology is coming on board all the time. The problem is more with people than it is with technology. A lot of utilities don't even realize yet that they need this digital transformation. It hasn't quite hit them yet. I've been in conversations with many utilities, and some of them are working on it. Some of them say, "Nah, we're not worried. We're not even thinking of that yet." But they need to be.
The technology exists today to do scalpel-like, precision-like control of those loads, to turn those places that are in demand that aren't needed to areas that are without. But again, I think it takes a willingness, and I think a different approach to policy as well, and also a willingness to invest, to put that technology in place to do the things like that.
Is this Brave New World something that is really consumer centric, or is it something that is going to cause me angst?
I don't know that it's so much consumer centric as it is sustainability and regulator driven.
That's interesting. You got any additions to that, Mike?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I would counter that. I think there is an opportunity, and again, I think the utilities have a great place to be the provider of these services, to engage customers in a way, I call it almost the democratization of energy, so that the power produced and or not consumed in partnership with the utility allows the consumer, or some people call these prosumers, producers and consumers of energy, to participate in a market in the same way other load nodes can participate in a market. And I think that will facilitate more. Well, one, it's going to facilitate resiliency into the grid, because the grid is, if we can optimize and orchestrate those many, many different loads.
Does the technology exist to be able to transition to this this digital age that we want to go to? Phil?
For the most part, yes. Some of the advanced stuff, not yet, but we're really close to it. And like I said before, I think the technology is the easy part.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it also unlocks innovation in giving the utility the ability to securely federate that data out to the developer world, to look for opportunities to provide new services to customers, because there's data there. Once you consolidate it under the platform that Phil was just talking about, unlocks all kinds of keys, some that utility is going to see right away and develop on their own, but many others, if they can figure out a way to federate it out, many others will come from the app development world. One other interesting project that's related, I've been part of, is an idea to deploy, I'll call it autonomous mobile batteries. So batteries charged up outside of the community in areas where solar can be. So this would be in an area, particularly in a very dense city environment where you can't put a lot of solar in. So if you would put, the solar farms would be on the outskirts of town, and mobile batteries would be there charging and discharging out into the network where the power is needed. These would be large size batteries. It could even be smaller size, where their dual purpose could be even transportation. So picking people. So it's a mobile battery first, and then but that type of technology that Phil's talking about would be able to map out that autonomously and move those energy resources around in a way that makes it look like baseload, which is what we're trying to replace.
Yeah.
Until you make it look like baseload and act like baseload,
yeah,
it'd be hard to get to those mandates that Phil's talking about.
But that's part of the problem, though, with the way that people think about change. Right? Lots of utilities have automation. Mm-hmm. Automation to where a operator pushes a button and XYZ happens. You start talking about autonomous operation, that scares the heck out of people, because right now, just about every operation that happens on the grid is initiated by a human. There's human in the loop. So the outage management system, the energy management system, it comes up with a solution and then waits for the operator to say, execute.
Yeah, go.
Yeah.
It is. It's still down to that switch. Yeah. Oh, mm-hmm. Yeah, you're spot on that one. But okay. I'm bullish on the future. I'm bullish on the ability for smart people to deal or to address these opportunities, these challenges within. And I believe from a consumer perspective, either we will be unaware They don't see it, right?
Mhm.
Then I think we're good. But I think we can answer these questions. Mike, where do you see it sort of going? I mean, put on your future hat. Let's say, what if? Dream. What do you think it's going? Paint that picture.
Yeah. So first of all, it starts with something you asked earlier, which is what do we need to do? And then I think one of these things will help the domino. Despite the market drivers we talked about, I still think there's a lack of education at the consumer level on some of these challenges. So I think I'd say one of the big things we need to invest more on is consumer education. And when I say consumer, I'm talking about every type of consumer, not just residential, multifamily, but also corporations and commercial and industrial on what this smarter grid, to use a term that's overused, can deliver in terms of benefits. Past that, I think the future will look like a lot of what the content delivery world looks like today, the Netflix streaming world, where when they first started delivering content, they recognized it, coming from a central server was not going to not cut the deal. I think now as we expand in the ways we've talked about, I think a tiered compute network is going to be what the future looks like, where the right amount of compute sits at the right part of the transaction. And there's a platform layer like what Phil's talking about, I think, that orchestrates that. Who wins that role? I think it's still up for grabs.
What about you, Phil? What do you think the future looks like?
The future is definitely digital. Gone are the days where the grid is stable because of inertia, meaning that most generation is done by a big spinning mass, and that mass wants to keep rolling on when something happens. We're going all inverter based now with wind and solar, which really needs some fast controls to stabilize the voltage and keep things up. I think utilities, a lot of them have realized that they need to get there. Some are just beginning the journey. Some are still saying, nah, it's not going to happen.
If we truly desire a sustainable, nimble, a system, the digital solution is the only way that we're going to get there. The physical solution that we have today does not allow for any of that to really, it sort of here, yeah, we'll let you have this little area here, whatever. But to truly transform and create something that is sustainable, it's a digital innovation type of conversation. You won't get there. And I guarantee you they'll lose that battle.
And furthermore, Scott, it's a digital control at the edge.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Some of these operations that are going to happen quickly,
Yep.
There's not enough time to send those digital signals back to a central location, have it processed, and then a command sent out to do something.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a functional safety component to that too that you mentioned, Phil. When power's coming the other direction and there's an outage, you got to know if your lineman so the system has to automatically adjust for the safety components of this new system as well immediately.
Well, and then there's another big one is when you start decentralizing the system and run these systems over networks, you need to pay a lot of attention to cybersecurity.
Is it doable? Are we, I mean, I'm talking to two of the best in the business. Is it doable? Are we going to get there? Whatever there looks like.
I think we are.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's being done. There's demonstrations of this. Good. Again, it's not at scale yet, but yeah, I totally agree with Phil. It's not a technology problem to solve. I think the technology exists to assemble the platform to deliver the services that we just described. It's the people for sure. It's also the momentum behind the incumbent legacy system. There's so much investment in it, all the way up and down, that it's hard. It's like moving a tugboat, an aircraft carrier with a tugboat. It's just really hard to move it. I think anyway, we've talked about that.
Nah, but it's going to happen. It is. And we're going to have to wrap this conversation up. We've been going on for about 45 minutes. However,
cool.
Mike, how does somebody get a hold of you?
Michael.e.bates@intel.com is the best.
Excellent. Phil.
Phil at careyconsultingservices.com.
That's like your last name.
Carey.
That's like your last name. Is it? Do you know the guy?
I have an in.
Hey, here's my resume. You two were excellent. This is just scratching the surface, and I can see additional conversations taking place as a result of this conversation, because I mean, we haven't even talked about the regulatory component. We haven't talked about any of the. I don't even have the answers, and I like the fact that it does. It just gets down to people, and then once the people make that decision of saying, yeah, it's going to happen, then things do happen. But you're right. Yeah. Technology is technology. It just is.
It is.
Yeah, you know, and you're so right. When we were working on, you know, some of this new technology, we went out to one of the locations where the engineering groups were. Gentlemen from the networking group and myself, we went out to go discuss IP addressing schemas with one of the substation engineers. And first of all, we started out with him not trusting us because we were from IT. But by the end of the conversation, he was ready to throw us out of his office physically. But a year later, he was one of our champions.
Yeah.
When he finally realized that this was coming and that there was no way he was stopping it.
So cool.
Jump on board, baby. Or jump in the pool. The water's fine. It's all nice and cool and refreshing.
Yeah.
Gonna have to do it. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, listeners, thank you very much for joining the Electric Utility Digital Transformation Journey. It's a mouthful, but it is what's taking place today. Oh, I forgot to ask you. It's global. We're not the only ones that have to deal with all of this. It's global, baby. Maybe to some extent or another, but it's a global challenge that I believe the technology can solve, but it goes right back to the people. Right back to the people. All right. Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.
Have a
Thank
good
you
one.
so much.
Yeah.